Right. So good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to the Chat with the Frat, sponsored by Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Omicron Phi Lambda Chapter, also known as the South Fulton Alphas here in Atlanta, Georgia. The Chat with the Frat is a discussion associated with all of those aspects associated with COVID-19. The Chat with the Frat is made up of an interdisciplinary team of brothers who are in our beloved fraternity. Our medical doctors, Dr. Leroy Graham and Dr. Terry Dickerson, our public health specialist and doctoral candidate, Brother Marcus Dumas, Dr. Darren Wright, Associate Professor of Clark Atlanta University School of Social Work, Dr. Christopher Bass, clinical psychologist, and associate professor at Clark Atlanta University, and Brother J. Carl Bryant, also a doctoral scholar at Capella University, in the process of completing his PhD in emergency management and critical infrastructure. So we want to take this opportunity to definitely welcome each and every one of you to this Easter Resurrection Sunday service of the Chat with the Frat that we entitle Faith and Works. We had some discussion on whether or not we wanted to move forward with this or skip and resume this series, but we decided that it is only appropriate to have one of the ministers of our chapter share a word or two associated with the significance and the importance of faith during this time of COVID. And as I shared with Pastor Brother Vickers, I've never participated in more prayer meetings this week than I have in a number of years. And so when we talk about the issue of faith, we'll hear some discussion and dialogue by Pastor Brother Eric Vickers, who's going to really just talk about that, as well as some of the challenges that churches are facing remaining relevant. Some of those, the ability of some of those churches to be able to move to the online ministry, as well as some of those churches, such as in San Diego and in Texas, a discussion about why some churches are literally trying to move forward and still hold services. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Christopher Bass, a clinical psychologist, because this series is called Faith and Works. And so the work side of this discussion is going to be just that, talking about what it is that we as individuals need to work on, what we need to work on with our families. So the faith and works dealing with anxiety, depression, as well as some other potential mental health issues that could develop during this crazy time of COVID-19. And so we've therefore labeled this Faith and Works. For those of you who attended our inaugural workshop, we first had our interdisciplinary discussion, where we initially in our first week started with a general discussion associated with COVID-19. The following session, we then had our medical doctors, Dr. Graham and Dickerson, provide just the facts and the stats associated with some of the medical issues, as well as even some discussion around some of the trends that we were seeing among pre-existing conditions and while certain populations were particularly hit, as well as removing some of the myths that associated with some of the medications. So those individuals did an outstanding job. And so now here we are in a time of faith and works. And so without further ado, I want to first of all welcome, you can take your phone off mute, Pastor Vickers. I want to welcome one of the neophytes of our beloved chapter, but he's a pastor, and there's nothing of a neophyte about him when it comes to the ministry. Brother Vickers, how you doing, sir?
Very well, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I saw you, you and Brother Christian handling the prayer meeting with the brothers on Thursday, which I think was definitely needed. And so, so this is almost to a degree a carry on over of your ministry, because we need you all as ministers more than anything to help make spiritual sense of what we are encountering. So tell me, Brother Vickers, what's the significance of the day, and how does that tie in with the issue of the day?
Well, certainly. Well, today is Resurrection Sunday, and for those of the Christian faith tradition, it is the climax. This is the pinnacle of celebration of our faith. It is the day where we acknowledge and affirm that for the first time in the history of the world, death now has a blemished record by virtue of Jesus being raised from the dead early on Sunday morning. And I actually spent some time today dealing with the tenets of that statement. For those of us who are familiar with church, particularly the African American church tradition, a lot of times when we hear the minister come to the end of his message, he'll say something like, he died on Friday, but early Sunday morning, he got up with all power in his hand. And while we celebrate that, it's really theologically inaccurate. Jesus did not just get up, but rather he was raised. And that special nuance is significant, because if I just get up, that's under my own power. But if I'm raised, it is under the power and authority of someone who is stronger than me. And why we celebrate that is because the same God who raised Jesus from the stench, stain, and sting of death is the same God who's able to raise us from systemic oppression, from that which holds us back, holds us down. And that's why we celebrate today. That raising is not just eschatological in nature, meaning the end times. It's not just something we can look forward to at the end of our lives or in the final judgment, but it's something that we can have hope in and hope for right now and every day. So that is the significance of the day, and even more so when we consider the struggle and strife that we're enduring with this global pandemic. Resurrection points us toward the hope that trouble doesn't last always, and that this can't last forever. And so that's something that we can hold on to, especially on a day like today.
Thank you. So it's absolutely amazing as I listen to you talk about how Jesus was raised from a dead level to a living perpendicular, certainly with all power in his hand. But it's very interesting on that too, because this is a time that we recognize the need for faith more than ever. But on that same token, Brother Vickers, we're hearing pastors in churches such as in San Diego as well as in Texas who says, but I still want you to come. I understand social distance, but we're going to put it in God's hands. So how do we reconcile someone who has an unquestionable faith at that same time willing to test that faith during such a critical epidemic?
Well, I think there are certain things that we first have to acknowledge. Number one, we are in uncharted territory. This is a completely unprecedented time, the likes of which none of us living have ever seen before. I've polled elders and asked them, have they ever lived through anything, seen or experienced anything like this? And the answer has been emphatically no. And so we're in strange times. We're in strange times. I think what's happening for the church is that we are now in a place and in a space where we have to return back to basics and investigate what it really means to be the church. Now, here's a concession that you might not hear many pastors say. There is an administrative side to the gospel. There is a business side to church life. The problem is there are some pastors who are more concerned about continuing the business or church business over the business of the church. The business of the church is to save souls and to care for sheep in the worst situations and conditions. That's being pastoral. Taking care of church business is being the administrator. And when you prioritize being the administrator over being the shepherd, things will never work out for you in the end. And so the reality is, yes, even before the pandemic, there are churches who live like people, Sunday to Sunday, week to week, paycheck to paycheck. And one bad Sunday can totally throw the operations of one's church completely off. Well, when the pandemic hit, even before the restrictions of only having 50 people maximum, there were some churches that had already closed their doors permanently.
Wow.
And so what we're seeing is not so much radical faith, but unrestrained fear. And the thing that we have to remember is that people of faith, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And that term sound mind in Greek means to be completely whole. And some of us aren't operating and exercising that command and that awareness. And so what we see is our folks operating out of fear and masquerading it as radical faith.
So what's the challenge then of those churches who, because now we've seen some churches hold Zoom sessions. We even saw, there's a church even did a conference call. So what happens to those churches that are unable to make the digital transformation?
Well, that's a great question. And to be honest, our church was one of the churches that was in transition. I think what we're seeing is that the churches that are struggling the most in this season and during this pandemic are those who refuse to live in the world that existed around them. I mean, think about it. Everything about your life you can access in your hand. You can go to Bank of America without getting in your car. All you have to do is unlock your phone and click a button. You can move money. You can do everything, just about everything that you need to do. The same with school, the same with our jobs, but it's different when it comes to our churches. It was said to me that there are two things that we always want to remain the same as we've always known them. That's our families and our churches.
Okay.
And we just can't operate like that. And so what we are seeing is that people who refused, churches that refuse to engage social media, churches that refuse to have a digital footprint, website, to utilize all of these vehicles and mechanisms, and the ones that are free especially, those are the ones that are suffering. And now I think it's a good thing. Churches are playing catch up. I was sharing with a colleague that we are now being pushed to the point that one of the things we'll have to reconsider is what it means to be both reverent and relevant in ministry post-COVID-19. So now being relevant and reverent and cutting edge will no longer mean that we have a website or that we stream. But I believe that this is getting ready to push the conversation in terms of having us revisit the basic principles and tenets of what it means to be the church. So now what's going to be cutting edge is how effective are you at taking care of the widows and orphans? How effective are you living out the tenets of Matthew 25? When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. In prison, you visited me. And so I think churches thinking creatively and constructively how to bring back the true tenets of what it means to be the church is going to cause us to reframe the conversation as far as what it means to be cutting edge. And the reality is we're at a point now that if churches don't get right, they're going to get left.
So it's very interesting, certainly, that you pose that. And I see a question that was presented that suggested that, before we get off the phone, before we get off Zoom, there's this ongoing discussion about the new normal or post-COVID-19 and what that norm looks like. So that's certainly a discussion. Even as I'm looking at this post and I'm seeing all the different professional backgrounds that are even present right now to speak. But one of the things I've certainly recognized is that we have in this digital world, and there was a book that came out once that talked about digital natives. And the digital natives are those, that generation of children who were born in technology. It's how they functioned and how they operated. And then there are the digital immigrants. These are the individuals like many of us who, when we were, well, let me speak to my age. I'm among one of the older people on here probably, but in my age, when we were in college, in undergrad, upon entering college, we didn't have this technology. We literally had the typewriter, and then the computer, the Macintosh certainly came. And so these are the digital immigrants. But then you have what I refer to as the digital refugees. And the digital refugees is that population that have never been interested in integrating technology. They don't have a Facebook. They barely use email. And yet some of these, Brother Vickers, are some of our pastors of churches. And some of these are some of our leaders, even of our boards.
Sure.
But then we're met with the challenge of, even if you don't possess that technology,
Sure.
you still have to surround yourself with those individuals with that. And so that's where my question and my concern kind of centers around. So how in this time can a church with no time to spare,
Sure.
how can a church make that transition to the technology? What must they do?
Well, I think you have to bite off manageable bites. You can start somewhere. I think that's the biggest thing. Where can we start, right? One of the things, and I'll use our church as an example. To your point, everybody is not going to get a Facebook page. That's just a fact. Many of my members are 65 years and older, and while I do have some 80 and 90-year-olds who started social media pages, and I think it's awesome, that's not going to be everybody's story. And so as a pastor, I have to always be concerned, not about the 99, but about the one. That one sheep who goes astray. And so I have to do all that I can to think creatively and constructively about the ways in which I can pull the entirety of my church together as best as I can. So one of the things that we utilize is freeconferencecall.com. We send out an email and a calling post, because everybody does an email. So we have a calling system where every member's number in the church is tied to the calling post for emergency messages. And so we put the message out there. Here's the conference line number. Here's the access code. You can dial in on this day at this time, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. for Bible study, right? And that's a way to connect people. And then, you know, the church has always been communal and conversational. Word spreads. And so if you know someone does not have email or social media, hey, spread the word. You talk about everything else. And so you trust people to do what we are naturally inclined to do, which is share information. That's what we're called to do as the church anyway, share information. So we put the ball in the court of our members to do that.
Thank you, Brother Vickers. Again, this discussion is called entitled Faith and Works, and we are talking to Pastor Brother Vickers in terms of some of the issues and challenges associated with the church making this transition. Do I have a reverb?
Yeah.
Okay. Talking to the church, making this transition. We also happen to have on that have joined us Brother Brian Webb, who is actually a fall initiate. God, Brian.
Spring 98. Spring 98.
98 initiative.
I know you wanted me in the fall.
Spring 98 initiative of Alpha Phi chapter, Alpha Phi Alpha. I made that, brother, but that was before I was saved. So you can't hold me responsible in terms of what happened to you before I was saved. Brother Webb, we are having this conversation now led by Pastor Vickers with regard to some of the issues and challenges of the church. So I want to ask you, name the historical church that you are, for which you are a member. And I want to ask you, at your church here in Atlanta, how are you aiding your elder members in making this transition? And that's the same thing for you, Pastor Vickers. Go ahead, Brother Webb.
Well, first, let me just say hello to all the distinguished gentlemen on this line here, Pastor Vickers and Dickerson and Bass and White. Just I'm privileged to join in with you today. This is a very relevant topic because, what COVID-19 did was it forced many churches into transitioning to online services, whether they wanted to or not, because it became more relevant. One of the things that your question is to how did we adapt or adjust to our senior population? I'll tell you, I remember March 15th, and this is my first time pastoring. So I looked at God and I said, really? Is this, 90 days in, COVID-19? I got to make a decision about not bringing a Baptist church to service. Are you kidding me? So this is a time, really, we're in a time where leadership is a must. Real leadership, and leadership is not predicated on what popularity is. It's what's best for the people. And so I made the decision early on that I didn't want to risk, because like Pastor Vickers, I have a high population of senior population. Butler Street Baptist Church, Ralph McGill, 315 Ralph McGill was in the old Fourth Ward, is 117 years old. So with like Pastor Vickers, I had that same dilemma as we're transitioning over. I had to come up with the complicated task of trying to figure out how do we connect our seniors to those. There was some, like, we're able to connect to Facebook, like you said, yeah, that kind of outworked the rest and, kind of get into what's going on. They were able to look on Facebook. For the majority of the population, though, they didn't have those kind of things accessible. So what I did was, and like you said, free conference call, that was good. But the problem with free conference call was that most churches was using it at the same time. And so people who were calling in, the system was crashing. So we had to figure out a different way, in addition to that, that we can get them the message. So what we did was, me personally, we just used, sometimes technology is good, but it's not perfect, right? You have to perfect the process more than what the technology can do for you. So what we did was, what I did personally, because I got enough complaints about we were leaving out the seniors because they weren't able to, I got it from a trustee every single Sunday. Not how good you preach, not how well. This many seniors did not hear the message. So what we did was, I got all the seniors, and like Pastor Vickers said, communication was the key part. So what we established was a conference call through the middle of the week with all the leaders, so we can kind of communicate and we can speak with one voice with the pastor. The second thing that we instituted was a prayer line, of course. And then the third thing that we instituted was, once I realized that the conference call line was not going to work, we did a call-in buddy system. Now, the key part to this, and this is why this is so rich, is because like Dr. White is talking about the natives and the immigrants. Well, I refer to new members. When you talk about the traditional church, guess what? You got the immigrants and the natives. So the natives are those, I've been here for 20 years doing my job, and here come these new people in here doing whatever, the immigrants. And so in my first year, could I mesh them and intertwine them, and they could see the good within both of them. So what I was able to do is partner some of the newer members, right, and the younger members to call in to some of the older members, put the phone simply on speaker and listen, because they had Facebook access live and they could listen to the message. And so we've had to, and what that has done is it has actually meshed those new members quicker with some of the older members and bonded them than what we would have done than coming together, because they're so territorial. And so what has happened as a result of this is that we've been able to do this like buddy partner calling system that has actually worked out pretty good. Because like I said, the main calling post system is crashing because so many churches are using it. So we've had to be creative in this situation, but also the bottom line is you have to look at a number of ways. It can't be just one shot, solution fix all. You got to be working from every angle to keep everybody connected in this situation. And one of the other things that I did, and I'll leave you here with this, is that I realized is some folk don't have phones, some folk don't have internet, but you know what they have? Mailing system. So even though we're in the technological age, I was able to go back to some old school tools, right? And communicate to those members who we couldn't reach through Facebook, we couldn't reach through the internet, and send out weekly letters to them that we're concerned. This is what we're doing. And these are things that you can have access to if you need. And the biggest thing is then them hearing my message was my concern is, one, making sure that they were healthy, that they were safe, and what needs they may have that we could get to them in this kind of need. And so like Pastor Vickers said, communication turned out to be the biggest key of all of this.
Wow, thank you very much. And so as we see the church, and I like the way you put it, Brother Webb and Pastor Vickers, this kind of hits home in your discussion where you talk about, making the distinction between the ministry part of the church and the administrative side of the church. But we do have a challenge, and I'll leave this here because we're talking about faith, and this challenge is going to almost ride us right into the work side of this discussion with Dr. Bass, and that is, and brother, other disciplinary member, Cal Bryant raised this point in terms of, but when I think about organizations, from the fraternity, the D9, any of the D9s, the lodges, whatever, but what is their role in, we talk about leadership all the time, but what is their role? Now, both of you all are alphas and you happen to be pastors of the church, but what is the role of the organizations in helping one of the cornerstones of the Black community in terms of the churches facilitate the social media side? And the challenge is we can't do that because of the social distancing. So Pastor Vickers, so what is it, should churches have an expectation of these organizations to step forward to provide assistance during these during the time of COVID-19? Pastor Vickers?
That's a great question, Brother White. I think that before churches can have an expectation of any other organization, they must first identify what their own expectations and goals are for themselves. And I say that as someone, obviously, who is a part of the church and a part of other organizations. I've learned in every organization, but especially in church, you have four kinds of people. You have the willing and able. You thank God for them. You have the willing but unable. You train them. You have the unwilling but able. You work around them. And you have the unwilling and unable. You avoid them altogether. I think what churches need to do in this time is really separate the wheat from the tare, and what you're able to do with who you have. And that's again, unfortunately, that's the administrative side. We're going through that right now. We're in the middle of terminating people, and we're able to use the excuse, we can't afford it right now because giving isn't where it needs to be, right? But we are analyzing, and we're cutting the cost. We're measuring twice. We're counting the cost and measuring twice. And we're figuring out, one, what we do well, how effective it is, and how we can improve those systems. And then once we figure that out, we can say, okay, here's where we need some help. This is what is beyond our area of expertise. Now we need to investigate the resources and connections that we have that can help push us to do what God has called us to do. But you have to do your own honest self-evaluating first. And it takes courage to do that. And it takes honesty as well.
All right. So give me those 4 again. I'm a visual person. So even as a professor, I'm always creating diagrams. You just identified 4 boxes. Give me those 4 boxes one more time. You said
You
the
have
4.
the willing and able.
Okay. Top
Thank
left.
God for him. Then you have the unwilling but able.
Okay.
You work around them.
Okay.
You have the able but unwilling.
Mm.
No, I'm sorry. Let me start over. Willing and able,
Uh-huh.
thank God for them. The willing but unable, you train them.
Mm-hmm.
The unwilling but able, you work around them. And the unwilling and unable, you avoid them altogether.
Mm. Mm. Well, thank you very much. So, brothers, again, I think during this particular time, having an important, detailed discussion as it relates to some of the challenges within the context of the church. What we recognize is that it is in the church that the absolute most vulnerable population that is being directly impacted by COVID virus is there. The population that is being infected by loved ones who are carriers of it. But as Dr. Dickerson and Graham talked about in the previous week, they can have this virus and move it and may not even fully show the symptoms. But we've learned in the last discussion that they can still yet pass it on. But those populations are within your church. And so if nothing else, in terms of what you've said, we literally have established a learning opportunity and a teachable moment for our church. So we are looking at, and we just thank you again, Pastor Vickers and Pastor Webb, for even joining in. And so you all watch what happens next. So when we talk about faith, and then we move on to the discussion of works. And when we talked about works, we all know the scripture, faith without works is dead. So it made sense that we measure these two. But when we're talking about works here, we are now saying that these are some things that we need to do in terms of taking care of ourselves mentally and physically. This is the work. We always know, start with myself, then the family, cover the block, on to the community. So now we're talking about the concept of works. And Brother Dumas, I'm going to slide you in that discussion from the question that you posed about the more dialogue around the new norm. I don't want to abandon that. But Dr. Bass, how are you doing, sir?
Blessed and highly favored, man, especially after that word from my brother Vickers and brother Webb.
Did you just say that because them pastors on the line?
Man, I had to, man. I had to. It was a beautiful thing. I didn't go to church this morning. At least I wasn't in the physical building, but I was online watching it. So
okay, good. Vickers and Webb, does this meet church service, Brother Bass? Does he?
Hey, man, I got my tithe money right here in my pocket if I need to. I can pull it out real quick if I need to, bro. Webb.
Right.
Come on, we need that.
The tomb was empty and the church house was empty at the same time.
All right now. I got you on Cash App, Reverend Vickers.
Dr. Bass, we're talking about works. You're a clinical psychologist.
Yes, sir.
You deal with mental health and issues and disorders and things in this regard with individual clients and groups on a daily basis. So now we're talking about works. Tell me what's going on. We're looking at the unemployment rate now at a historical high. Mm-hmm. We're looking at as even Pastor Vickers just talked about, people are being laid off. And so now there's a time of the unknown and uncertainty. While some mortgage companies are welcoming and car companies are saying, sure, let's do it. But for those people, for example, living in apartments, those owners of those apartments, they're not as sensitive. So we have a lot of stress. We have a lot of anxiety. So Dr. Bass, tell me what it is that you're seeing.
Okay, I appreciate that intro. Let me say, first of all, that it's an honor to be here. A lot of times, historically, psychologists have been excluded from the conversation, especially in the Black community. We don't really take heed to working with folks who have studied behavior in the mind. So this is a welcome treat for me. Pairing it with the pastor is also a wonderful thing, because a lot of my clients historically have said, well, you know what, I always learned that if I had a psychological issue, I need to pray it away, or I need to go and get healed from it. So again, it's good that this faith and works is paired together, because again, I believe that all things work together. And since I brought it in that way, let me, before I answer your question, Brother White, let me say this. We are creatures of habit. All of us, all 29 of us are creatures of habit. And I want to start off quickly with a case. I had a young lady who I've been working with. Actually, she's not so young. She's about 57. And I've been working with her for almost a year now. You know, of course, similar to many clients now with this COVID-19, she's having increased anxiety. So we got to talking, and I noticed that she wanted to talk a little bit more, you know, over the last couple of weeks than our normal 45 minutes to an hour session on Wednesdays. So we got into talking the other day, and she said, Doc, I'm so scared, I'm terrified. And I said, well, when you were growing up, what did you do when you were scared? And she said, well, my daddy was always there. My daddy was always there, and he always did this special thing for me. He would take quarters, and he would flip these quarters under my bed. And I knew that if, you know, my daddy wasn't in my room, then those quarters would be okay for me. And I said, would you still do that? And she said, oh no, Dr. Bass, you know, I'm 57 years old. I don't do stuff like that anymore. You know, that's ridiculous. And I said, okay, put us on FaceTime. I want us to walk into your bedroom. And she said, no, Dr. Bass, my bedroom's not clean. I said, it's okay. I'm going to call her Jennifer. It's okay, Jennifer. I'm not looking at your clothes all over the place. I want to see what's under the bed. And she said, there's nothing under my bed. I said, let's look under your bed. And you can imagine what happened next. As we walked closer to her bed, her anxiety started to go up a little bit. And then she shined that light up under her bed. And what did we see? Stacks and stacks of quarters. You got to understand that she was doing this unconsciously. She didn't even know that she was flicking the quarters up under there. But it was a habit that she did over and over and over when she got scared. It was what she went to. So, of course, me being the great scientist that I am, I said, yo, what did I do when I, you know, got scared as a child? Well, I used to eat fig Newtons, but I don't think there's any fig Newtons in my cabinet. So I walked over to my cabinet, and what did I see? Whole stacks of fig Newtons lined up all over the place. And I'm like, yo, talking to my wife, I'm like, yo, where did all these fig Newtons come from? And she said, Chris, right before this whole shutdown, you mandated that we have a whole cart of fig Newtons. And I'm like, who knew? My point in telling you all this is very simple. We resort back to the things that we know. We do. We resort back to the things that provide some comfort for us because we are creatures of nature. And because we are creatures of nature, we have to be able to predict certain things. There's always going to be a need to know certain things, especially when we get into places where we don't know, we're going to resort back. Now, in our first conversation, I remember saying to you all, you got to understand that everybody does stress differently. Nobody does stress exactly the same way. I'm an identical twin brother. And when I looked into my cabinet and I saw all of that, he's Alpha too, by the way. But when I talked to him and I told him about my fig Newton piece, he said, yo, I don't have any fig Newtons in my cabinet. He went and checked and he didn't have anything in his. Why? Because he was used to eating my fig Newtons, but that's another story. My point is everybody handles stress totally different, okay? So you asked about Dr. White, you asked about the unemployment rate. And right now we have to understand, I believe right now we're still at 6.9%, up from 6.9 million, up from 3.3 million just about 3 weeks ago. So they predict that this is going to continue to rise, which creates a lot of weird feelings for people. Now, what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk quickly about our thoughts. You know, understand that all of us have these thoughts, but it's not until we put emotion and feeling into it that we have the results. So when we go to thoughts, We put emotion to it. We have feelings, and understand that feelings can't just not operate. They're going to come out in our behavior. And those things that come out in our behavior can either be to the good or to the perceived bad. Okay? Everybody right now is struggling, trying to figure out, okay, what's next? How do I deal with this emotion of being anxious? How do I deal with this emotion of the unknown or not knowing what's next? So I have to do something. I have to say something for my family. I have to say something for my children. I have to. But here's my thing, brothers. When it comes to having to say something, most times, just your very presence is good enough. Let me say that again for the brothers in the back. Sometimes you don't have to say a word. They're looking for you to be there. They're looking for you to be right there with them. Now, I understand that some people, can't be present psychologically all the time. And let me say that I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation on Thursday. That conversation, Brother Vickers and Brother Christian, that you all put on, I was really into it until my wife said, Chris. I was like, oh man, okay, let me not get in trouble. So we have to make sure that we still honor some of the rules of the house. But I see a lot of brothers finding themselves stressed out, not just with the economy, not stressed out with what's going on at work, but stressed out about being at home. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the stress of this quote unquote new norm. I don't want to lecture to you, even though I feel like I've been lecturing to you for the last couple of minutes, and I don't want to run the time. But I have to say this new norm of being home, so many brothers are calling me and sisters calling me saying, hey, I don't like this person who I'm waking up with anymore. I don't know this person who I'm eating breakfast with every day. Who is this person without their haircut? Who is this woman with her hair not done? Who are these children? Who are these kids? I love them, but we're used to going away early in the morning and coming back late at night. So now we're starting to, and I hope Dr. White, you and Dr. Wright talk about this next week. What happens when you walk into the kitchen and you meet a stranger?
Say that again now.
What happens when you walk into the kitchen and you meet a stranger?
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
I know what it means.
I know.
Elaborate.
What that means is my wife and I have been married 30 years. Okay. Love the woman to death. But when we wake up in the morning, we spend the majority of our time outside of our home. She's at Spelman, I'm at Clark Atlanta, or I'm in my office. Okay. So when we come back in the evening time, we eat dinner sometimes we eat coming home, and then we go to sleep, and then it starts again. We're creatures of habit. We're into a routine, right? So with those of you who have small children, same thing. You wake your children up, you get them cleaned up, you have breakfast, and then you go on, and then you see them a little bit later. So you got to understand that the teachers and the coaches and the dance leaders are the ones who are doing a lot of the heavy work of raising these kids. So when we see them now and they say, okay, daddy, help me with this algebra. And you're like, hold on, this must be the new math. I don't know this math. Well, it's not the new math. It's the same math. It's just that you hadn't seen it in so long that it's foreign to you. It's not a part of your routine. So when I say you meet a stranger, you're meeting your wife for the first time after a long period of time. You're reintroducing yourself to the habits of your children, who may do things that are outside of the norm. And for my folks who have college students coming home, I have to give you all a special shout out, because I have a college student, a freshman, who just came home, and this dude, he's out, up on the balcony, or out on the deck at 2:00 in the morning, cooking burritos. Music is constantly blasting out of his room. He come down with these do-rags and flip-flops on, and I'm like, yo, who are you? So it's a refamiliarization of who I know this person to be. So
thank you, Dr. Bass. So now very quickly, so in the home, now the stress in the family, because we're seeing each other. Our spaces, why is it that the spaces suddenly seem smaller? Now we are having these encounters. Why is it that the patience and the tolerance is getting shorter? What's happening there? And we're watching the news daily, and that's increasing. That's doing something to us as well. So the work side, what's happening there?
Well, what's happening there is that there's something called cabin fever. And we sort of talked a little bit about that on the first call that we had. Cabin fever is not a real clinical diagnosis, but we also have something called claustrophobia. And anytime you're in a space that you don't feel like you have the ability to escape it, you'll begin to have these psychological things to happen or to occur. One of those things, it'll feel like the space that you're in becomes significantly smaller. So I want to talk about quickly what happens to prisoners when they go to jail. It takes about 72 hours before many of them have their first psychological experience with claustrophobia. 72 hours. So we've been in this for what, 3 weeks now? So it makes sense to me that many of us may feel like the walls may be getting a little bit closer in. We may feel like we can't escape it. And what I don't want to happen is for many of the brothers on the line to experience something called learned helplessness. Now, many of us are familiar with learned helplessness. Learned helplessness means that you stop wanting or needing to escape. As I said the first time, one of the cures or the cure for cabin fever is to just open up your doors and step outside, interact with, nature, see what nature is telling you. If you sit out on your porch, what you'll find is all of those anxious feelings, those feelings of irritability, which is the number one telltale sign of cabin fever, it goes away because now you have the power to control something. And ultimately, that's what it is. We have a need to control.
Okay. So I got 2 questions for you as I keep an eye on the time.
Okay.
Number 1 deals with Black men and mental health. One of the things that we certainly recognize the opportunity for counseling, and actually it's interesting because this fits in with Pastor Vickers and Pastor Webb as well. But you have Black men who are hesitant about going to go and get counseling. They look upon it as perhaps being weak, or there's a glitch in their armor. And so trying to get these brothers to go, I mean, my domestic violence, court-ordered domestic violence group is full. That court-ordered domestic violence group that I do on a Saturday morning, I have 10 people in that thing, court-ordered. All of them are paying $45 a week. However, the same anger management, emotional management class is only $20 if you're non-court-ordered. But I can't get them to understand emotional management, conflict resolution, dealing with your spouse, and it's $25. So there's something about this hesitation about going to go and get treatment. And then here's where to the ministers where things kind of converge a little bit, because what ends up happening is that you have some say, well, or even the women, I'll go to the pastor. But what if the pastor doesn't have that training, or what if the pastor doesn't have anyone on their staff with that particular training? So Dr. Bass, so what do we say to Black men to get them to understand that it's cool to go in to get the counseling, to get a third ear as they work to deal with this particular time? What do we say to them?
Tell them that they won't lose their power in counseling. That's a big thing for brothers. They have this belief that somehow they're more vulnerable when they emote. It's something that we've been trained to consider. And that's big lie, huge lie. When you come into a therapy session, you have just as much power as any therapist. And if you don't, you're seeing the wrong person. You don't lose your power in therapy. You actually gain power. You gain an insight into who you are.
So the work. So what is it that we need to be doing, Dr. Bass, right now as we kind of prepare for as we are coping and dealing with this? What is it that we as Black men need to be doing to ensure that our mental health during these uncertain times? We know for a fact that even if I'm looking at 32 brothers on the line, and I'm looking on Zoom, and I'm looking at 16 brothers that have called in, if I'm looking at this entire population, somebody has just gotten the word that they're laid off. Somebody has just gotten that they just saw somebody else get laid off. Someone is struggling with the level of unknown. So what is it that we need to do right now, from our breathing, whatever, to cope with dealing with this time of uncertainty?
Well, the first thing is don't panic. That's the first thing. When you find yourself panicking, you lose the ability to actually think more rationally. You know, that's number one. Do not panic. Number two, as you mentioned, Dr. White, there are many different breathing techniques that you can employ. Very, very important to relax, teach yourself or train yourself to relax, and ask yourself the fundamental question. What's next becomes scary because it's unknown. But who says the unknown has to be bad? Why have we trained ourselves to think that the future that's unknown necessarily has a bad piece to it? What if the unknown or the future is actually so much better and brighter than the past was? We have to begin to change things. I need you, and I need a quick second to talk to those brothers who live by themselves. I mean, that's a huge group of folks that we haven't even touched on yet. And I know we're running close to time, but let me say to my brothers who live by yourself, more than the brothers who have families around them, do something with your hands. And I know that sounded kind of weird.
Dr. Bass does teach a health education class, so yeah, you do need to clarify that, Brother Bass.
Do something with your hands, and what I mean by that, all jokes aside, is I need brothers to create something. You know, you have to stimulate your mind by creating something. You know, this is not the season for death. This is the season for resurrection. This is the season for creation. Can I get some, pastors? Can I get some?
You on, man. You on.
Okay. All right. See, that's my time. So here's my thing. Make sure that you're creating something. Make sure that, brothers, if you find yourself isolating, make sure that you reach out. Journaling. I see somebody down there, Dr. Bowden mentioned, journaling is very good. Exercise is very good. Getting out of your house. Chewing gum. Finding things to laugh at. Finding good music to listen to. Deep breathing. Watch out for self-medication. Do not, and I got to say this, do not engage in overindulging in alcohol and other substances, because it does not help you. It hurts you. Okay? And I know I'm speaking to the choir. I know brothers don't want to hear that, especially with the brotherhood smoke. I got into some trouble with another group who, when I got to the brotherhood smoke part, they were like, nah, Bass, nah. But my point is this. COVID virus or COVID-19 is an upper respiratory disease. So when you talk about smoking anything or bringing anything into your lungs, you're really compromising yourself even more than if you didn't. So at this point, what I'm asking brothers to do is slow down on the alcohol, slow down on the cigarettes. If you smoke weed, slow all of that down. Slow down on the caffeine products, you know, coffee, all of that. You don't need anything that's going to stimulate you and then drop you off. Refined sugars, stay away from those. And please, please, please turn off your TVs after 3 hours. Anything more than 3 hours, you're really damaging your hippocampus. You're also damaging your frontal lobe.
Okay. Well, Brother Bass, I thank you deeply for, what you shared. I also have a great appreciation, Brother Vickers, Pastor Vickers and Pastor Webb on board, and to also add to this. You got so many brothers from our chapter on here, Pastor Webb. I'm gonna let you know right now, don't mess around and get reclaimed. I'm just letting you know. Brothers, Dr. Bass just recently paid his dues, so he's reclaimed, and he is in Omicron Phi Lambda. So that's a chapter brother in O Phi Lambda that is that delivered this portion of the discussion. So brothers, I want to thank everyone.
Bro, Doc,
Yes,
can I
sir.
say one more quick thing, bros?
Yes.
This is really, really quick. And I have my notes right here. I wanted to say this before I got off. Stress is not designed to hurt you. Stress is there as a protectant. So listen to the stress. Listen to the stress. It's not designed to hurt you. Go ahead, Doc.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Needed that one as well. But I appreciate you so much, you all, for coming on and delivering this. This is our third series. And, as we learn more and more, just last week we were at 12% unemployment. Now we're at 14.7% unemployment. So literally every week something changes. Every week we are confronted with something new, which is what signifies our wake-up call. We are now at a capacity of 525,704 cases as of today, 20,486 deaths as of today. So every week in this discussion, we have this dialogue. But I'm going to tell you all that if you have not communicated with anyone, you really need to get on board for what's going to take place on next week. Because we have Brother J. Kyle Bryant, and we have Brother Dumas, who will be on board talking again from a public health standpoint, dealing with the public health, and Brother Kyle dealing with risk communication. So why is that so important? Because we are in a public health crisis. And so now we are at the need for you all to have a more detailed understanding in terms of what that means. And then as Brother Kyle Bryant brings forth with you all, we're now seeing some health disparities. We're now seeing a disproportionate number of African Americans being hit who are losing their lives more than others. And we know that that is associated with secondary, what do they call it, Brother Dumas, with pre-existing conditions. And so we see that these pre-existing conditions are present and is literally taking out a community. So we want you all to tell someone, when you all see the link come forward and dealing with those pre-existing conditions, I need you all to get ready to listen to what Brother Dumas and Brother J. Kyle Bryant has to offer in that regard. And then following that week, for after next week, then you are going to have myself and Dr. Wright. Are you on there, Dr. Wright? Unmute, Dr. Wright.
I'm here, good brother. Good evening to all others. I'm here.
Okay, so we're going to have myself and Dr. Wright talk about this pandemic and its impact on the African American family. And why do you all want to be present for that discussion? Because I'm going to tell you that there is another pre-existing condition that we have to be mindful of that is also wreaking havoc, and that is the pre-existing condition of your family. If your family was already struggling with communication, your family was already struggling with financial issues, these are pre-existing conditions. And so these pre-existing conditions, trust, adultery, lack of faith, if these pre-existing conditions are there, that makes your family particularly vulnerable to this quarantine movement. So I'm going to tell you all, get ready for our docs. These are our doc brothers, because Brother Dumas as well as J. Kyle Bryant are finishing their PhDs right now. So we handed the gavel of authority over to those two brothers for next week to impart that level of wisdom. And then again, the following week, myself and Dr. Wright will be available. So Brother Wright, I see you raise your hand. Is there a statement before we get off?
Not really. I think that Brother Bass covered a lot, Dr. Bass, and the only thing I wanted to add to that was in regards to us as Black men, is just understanding that point of vulnerability is really from a point of growth, that one cannot grow if they're not open to understanding what their needs are in terms of being self-reflective. So I just wanted to add that that's a point for us in terms of growth.
Oh boy, I'm telling y'all right now, this thing is about to get clinically deep over these next couple of weeks. So I'm just telling you all right now, you certainly better get get folks on board and get them ready for the discussion and the dialogue that we have. So I want to tell you all on behalf of the interdisciplinary team, Dr. Graham, Dr. Dickerson, Brother Dumas, Brother Bryant, Dr. Wright, Dr. Bass, and myself, we want to thank you all for coming. We especially want to thank our guests today, Brother Vickers and Pastor Webb, for imparting and being present to add color, dialogue, and insight into this Resurrection Sunday. So I'm going to close as always with one of our leaders.
Hold on, brother. Marshall White. Brother White, I got to say one last thing before you close. You know, I'm a preacher. I got to say one more thing to kind of bring this full circle, brothers. To kind of lean into Brother Dumas's question that he raised. One of the things that I believe we'll have to be concerned about, Dr. Bass, is trauma coming out of this pandemic. Right. There are a lot of people who have suffered loss and who have had to pretty much leave their deceased loved ones at the cemetery like trash on the curb. And I'm concerned with how our parishioners and just people in society will have to reconcile bidding farewell to their loved ones without traditional funeral ceremonies and rites of goodbye. And so one of the things that I say to my congregants all the time, and I think it's appropriate to share with the brothers now, is that coming out of this pandemic, we have to live at the intersection of prayer and practitioners. You need Jesus and a therapist. And so that's a beautiful merging of this conversation. And I just could not sit here without sharing that's something that we're going to have to live with for at least a generation.
Thank you very much, Pastor Vickers. And you all are in for a treat when Dr. Wright talks about the importance of African-American rituals to include worship as well as the burial piece. And so we'll look forward to having you all on board. Is our president, Brother Taggart, on?
Yes, brother. I'm here, Brother Marshall Taggart.
We'll have a closing words from our president.
Whole dialogue. Yeah, very impressed with the whole dialogue. Really appreciate your leadership, Brother Gerry White, for making this happen. Brother Bass, I hear, and me too, in the throes of getting our doctorates, Kyle and also Marcus in this case. And then, of course, Dr. Graham. Thank you, Brother Webb, for joining the call. We really appreciate it. And then, of course, our Neo, Brother Vickers. Again, brothers, great treat. Next, if you think this is great this week, wait until Sunday. I know Brother Gerry White has a treat, and it's definitely going to keep everybody informed and engaged. So we appreciate that. And happy Easter to you and your families.
Well, thank you very much, Brother President. So once again, brothers, we appreciate you all. Also, we recognize our Vice President, Brother Robert Cunningham, who facilitated the prayer meeting on Thursday. So once again, brothers, on behalf of the chapter, I can't thank you all. And I'm going to take a very quick point of personal privilege. If you all see in the bottom hand, I don't know where he is, but there's a brother on the phone. It's named Roni. And you all see that brother over there. I just want y'all to know that's who pledged me. So anybody have any complaint about how I facilitated or engaged in your process, just understand that Negro right there in 1985, that Negro who pledged in 85 made me in 89. So I ain't gonna let you speak. This is my turn. It's over. So brothers, on behalf of the chapter, I love y'all. Nothing we can do about it. Until we meet again on next Sunday, please share it with someone, get someone involved. I can hold up to 300 people on this line. So I look forward to seeing you all on next week. Once again, thank you. Take care. God bless. If you don't mind, I'd like our interdisciplinary team to remain on for the debriefing. And brothers, thank you all and take care. And once again, God bless.